Ethan eased his car up to the curb in front of his house, leaning back with a grin as he shut off the engine. Today felt like his lucky day. He'd won the office raffle, scoring an early release from work this Friday. With a whole afternoon and weekend stretching out ahead of him, he felt like he'd hit the jackpot. As he reached for his briefcase on the passenger seat, he spotted a car parked a little too close to his house, a sleek, polished silver sedan. He squinted at it briefly but shrugged it off. Street parking was common, and his mind was already on surprising his wife, Rachel. Usually, he'd be home just in time for dinner, but today, he'd catch her right in the middle of her day. Pushing open the front door, Ethan called out with a cheerful, "Honey, I'm home." "Where are you?" The house felt unusually quiet. Then he heard Rachel's voice, but what he thought he heard made him stop in his tracks at the entryway. "Stop coming." The words sounded like Rachel's voice, but strange and almost muffled. Ethan froze, wondering if he'd heard right. His heart started to beat faster, a ripple of unease creeping in. Clearing his throat, he called again, "Rachel, what was that?" Moments later, Rachel's voice came again, this time louder, "Oh, stop talking and come in. I'm in the bedroom, everything's fine." Ethan frowned, confusion tugging at his smile. Taking the stairs two at a time, he chuckled to himself, figuring she was probably on the phone with someone, though it still struck him as odd. As he reached the bedroom door, he found Rachel sitting up in bed, smoothing her hair with a smile. But something about her looked off, the faint blush on her cheeks, the slight rumple of her clothes, made Ethan pause. "Rachel," he began slowly, "I could have sworn I heard you say, 'Stop coming,' not 'Stop talking and come in.' What was that about?" Rachel let out a small laugh, though Ethan noticed it sounded a bit forced, maybe even nervous. She waved a hand dismissively. "Oh, Ethan, you must have misheard," she said with a shrug. "I was chatting with Emily, and things got jumbled, you know how it is." Ethan nodded, but a sliver of doubt lingered. He'd always been a trusting husband, but today, something felt different. Glancing at Rachel, he furrowed his brow. "Honey, whose car is that parked out front near the house?" Rachel's eyes widened a touch before a bright smile spread across her face. She gestured toward the window. "Oh, that's Nick's car, Kate's husband. I completely forgot to tell you. He bought it recently and dropped by to show it off. Isn't it nice?" Kate was Rachel's sister, and Ethan knew Nick. Ethan blinked in surprise. "Nick's here. Why didn't you call me?" Rachel's hands fluttered as she explained, "Well, it happened so fast. He was nearby for work and thought, why not drop by for a visit? So we were chatting, and I sent him out to grab some coffee and sweets, you know, maybe some chocolate donuts or those croissants from the cafe down the street. Oh, and he suggested we should all get together tomorrow for a barbecue." Ethan scratched his head, still feeling a bit thrown. Just as he was about to respond, the doorbell rang. Rachel perked up. "Oh, that must be him." She glanced at Ethan and gave a quick wink. Perfect timing, right? Following Rachel downstairs, Ethan felt a strange, uneasy sensation settling in his stomach. When she opened the door, there was Nick, looking a little too casual. His shirt hung slightly untucked, his hair tousled in a way that didn't seem entirely intentional. He greeted Ethan with a sheepish grin, his tone overly friendly. "Oh, hey, Ethan. Good to see you, man. Glad you're back early." Before Ethan could say anything, Rachel jumped in quickly, her voice a little too upbeat, "Nick, did you get the coffee and pastries?" Nick chuckled awkwardly, scratching the back of his neck. Yeah, about that, I got a little lost on the way. Not too familiar with the area." Rachel raised her eyebrows, her smile tight, as she reached out to usher him inside. "Oh, Nick, it's just down the street. I told you exactly where it was." She motioned for the two men to sit at the kitchen table. "You boys get comfy. I'll show Nick the way myself." Ethan, anything specific you'd like? Thoroughly bewildered by the stream of explanations, Ethan nodded slowly. Sure, a large coffee, maybe a custard croissant would be great. Rachel smiled, patting his shoulder before disappearing into the other room to change her clothes. Meanwhile, Ethan turned to Nick, watching him as he fidgeted in his seat. So, Nick, Ethan began, aiming to keep things light, about that barbecue? Nick's eyes went wide for a second, and a flash of panic crossed his face. Barbecue? When's that happening? Ethan caught the awkward response but kept on. Rachel mentioned you were planning a barbecue tomorrow, just some family time, right? Nick hesitated, then stammered, oh, yeah, a barbecue. That's what I meant. Sounds great, a chance for everyone to, catch up and hang out. Good idea. Ethan narrowed his eyes. Between Rachel's story and Nick's reaction, something didn't feel right, the pieces weren't fitting together. But before he could dig any deeper, Nick quickly pulled out his phone. Actually, why don't I call Kate right now? I'll let her know we're set for tomorrow. He fiddled with his phone, throwing a nervous glance Ethan's way as it rang. Kate's voice came over the line, a little surprised. Nick, is everything okay? Nick forced a laugh, holding the phone up for Ethan to see as he switched to video. Kate, I'm here with Ethan and Rachel, just planning the barbecue for tomorrow. Say hi to Ethan. Ethan gave a small wave, even as his chest tightened. Nick was laying it on thick, showing Kate the room, chatting with her, and introducing Ethan over the call, like he was proving something. After a few awkward exchanges, Nick ended the call and pocketed his phone with a deep exhale. Ethan leaned back, arms crossed. He couldn't shake the feeling that this whole setup, Rachel's coffee and donut story, Nick's jittery excitement about the barbecue, was layered with more than they were saying. Right then, Rachel reappeared, purse slung over her shoulder. All right, Nick, she said, her tone almost too upbeat, ready to give it another shot and find the cafe. Nick stood up quickly, nodding, right, let's go. He shot Ethan a strained smile. See you in a bit, Ethan. We'll be back with treats. As Rachel and Nick stepped out, Ethan sat in the quiet of the house, replaying the odd series of events from the afternoon. The second the door closed behind them, he headed back upstairs. At first, nothing seemed out of place, but as he reached the window, he noticed it was slightly open, letting in the cool afternoon air. A thought crossed his mind: what if Nick had actually been here, right in this room, and slipped out the window when Ethan arrived? It sounded far-fetched, but stranger things had happened. Peering out, Ethan noted that the garage roof below was only a short drop. It wasn't out of the question that Nick could have made a quick escape that way. Deciding to check it out, Ethan jogged back downstairs and stepped outside to inspect the ground below the window. He didn't see much, just a few faint scuffs in the grass, but it was enough to keep his doubts alive. Then, out of the corner of his eye, he spotted Jason, the neighbor's kid, riding his skateboard along the sidewalk. Ethan waved, "Hey, Jason. How's it going?" The kid skidded to a stop, grinning. "I'm good, sir." Ethan leaned in with a friendly smile. "Hey, Jason, you see anything interesting around here today?" Jason's eyes lit up. "Oh, yeah, sir. I saw a guy climb out of your window, like he was Spider-Man. He just dropped right down, no big deal. I want to try that someday." Ethan laughed, ruffling Jason's hair. "That's impressive, Jason." He slipped the boy a couple of dollars for ice cream and watched him ride off, grinning. The kid's words gave Ethan a jolt. It wasn't solid proof, but it was enough to keep his suspicions running high. Taking another look around the yard, Ethan's gaze landed on something dark and small near the wall. Kneeling down, he picked it up, a shirt button, scratched from a rough landing. Upon closer inspection, he recognized it as the kind that might belong to a nice dress shirt. Sliding the button into his pocket, Ethan grimaced. Sure, Nick could have dropped at any time, but the timing was just a little too perfect for his liking. Ethan steadied himself and made his way back to the kitchen just as Rachel and Nick returned, carrying a large coffee in a bag of pastries. Rachel's cheeks were flushed, and Nick looked a bit winded, but they both put on overly bright smiles as they set the treats on the counter. "Here you go, Ethan," Rachel chirped, her voice a little too cheerful. "One large coffee and a custard croissant, just like you wanted." "Thanks, hon," Ethan replied, keeping his tone light as he reached for his coffee. They all took seats at the kitchen table, and Ethan kept a close eye on Nick, watching him adjust his sleeves. That's when he noticed it, the left cuff on Nick's shirt was missing a button. "Oh, Nick," Ethan said with a chuckle, acting as if he'd only just noticed, "looks like you lost a button there." Nick's face froze for just a beat before he forced a laugh. "Oh, yeah, that must have happened at work or something. I can be a bit careless sometimes," he added, rubbing the back of his neck with an awkward smile. Ethan joined in the laughter, but his mind was racing. The missing button, Jason's story, the hurried explanations, they were all starting to fall into place. But Ethan wanted to come up with a plan to catch Nick and Rachel red-handed. Rachel nudged him with her elbow, breaking his train of thought. "So, what do you think? Family barbecue tomorrow?" Ethan forced a grin. "Sounds great." The following evening, everyone gathered in Ethan's backyard for the barbecue. The sun was dipping low, casting a warm amber glow over the yard. The scent of grilling meat filled the air as Ethan manned the barbecue, tongs in hand, watching Nick and Kate chatting at the table. Rachel moved around with a pitcher of lemonade, filling glasses and keeping the conversation light. It looked like the perfect, relaxed gathering for friends and family, but Ethan was anything but relaxed. As he observed them, he picked up on little things. Nick looked distracted, his eyes drifting toward Rachel more than his own wife, Kate. And Kate, elegant as always, seemed a bit on edge, her smile slipping each time Nick looked away. Ethan had suspected tension in their marriage, but now he was almost certain. The moment Ethan had been waiting for came when Nick excused himself to use the bathroom, and Rachel went to the kitchen for more drinks. Ethan saw his opening and quietly slid into the seat across from Kate, who was staring down into her glass, lost in thought. "Hey, Kate," Ethan said softly, "is everything okay with you and Nick? I've noticed a little tension." Kate looked up, startled, before giving him a small, uneasy smile. "Oh, Ethan," she sighed, swirling the ice in her glass. "It's nothing serious, really, just Nick's been acting strange lately, and it's starting to get under my skin. But hey, every couple has rough patches, right?" Ethan nodded, understandingly. "Of course. But if you need anything or just want to talk, I'm here." Kate's eyes softened with gratitude, and she hesitated as if debating whether to open up. She leaned in, her voice dropping to a near whisper. "Thank you, Ethan. Sometimes I feel like he's hiding something. I'm probably overthinking, but if he ever turns out to be cheating," she paused, then let out a bitter laugh. "Let's just say he'd regret it." Ethan chuckled sympathetically, but her words struck a chord, they held a sharp edge and an unmistakable resolve. Kate's suspicions were just the leverage he might need, but he knew he'd have to tread carefully. This conversation confirmed he wasn't the only one sensing that Nick was up to something. "Thanks for being so understanding, Ethan," Kate said, giving his hand a grateful squeeze. "Nick would never guess I'm catching on, but I see more than he realizes." As the evening went on, Ethan found himself replaying Kate's words in his mind. She wasn't quite ready to confront Nick yet, but her instincts were keen. If he could use her suspicions to his advantage, he might be able to corner Nick, forcing him into a situation with no way out. The gathering eventually wound down, the dishes were cleared, and everyone exchanged goodbyes. As Nick and Kate walked to their car, Ethan noticed Kate striding a few steps ahead, her face set with a look of quiet determination. Rachel gave him a playful nudge, drawing his attention back to her. "Did you have a good time?" she asked, her smile bright and seemingly innocent. Ethan nodded, masking the turmoil beneath his calm exterior. Yeah, it was nice. Family's important. Rachel leaned in for a quick kiss, her voice soft. I'm glad. We should do this more often. Ethan returned her smile, though his mind was churning. He'd gathered enough hints, and he knew it was almost time to set a plan in motion. But he needed patience, he couldn't rush things. The timing had to be just right, and maybe he could even bring Kate in without raising too many suspicions. In the following days, Ethan considered his options. Installing hidden cameras had felt oddly empowering. He spent time online researching, weighing the benefits of hiring a private investigator against the idea of setting up cameras around the house himself. Cameras were cheaper, and he could sell them afterward. The setup was quick, he installed them all while Rachel was out one day, positioning each one perfectly to cover the main areas of the house. Monitoring the footage from his phone gave him a sense of control he hadn't felt in weeks. Next, he arranged a short break from work, telling Rachel that he was being sent on a week-long business trip. She seemed to believe him, and Ethan moved in with his old friend Sam, who offered him his spare room without question. Over the next few days, Ethan kept a close eye on the cameras, watching for any sign of Nick. Rachel had called him a few times, her tone a little too sweet, her questions a bit too frequent. Ethan couldn't shake the sense that she was fishing for reassurance that he was really out of town. Then one evening, a conversation over the cameras caught his attention. Rachel's voice was low, almost eager. Nick, I'm free, but I don't know, after last time, I'm feeling uneasy. Ethan might be gone for a week, but what if he comes back early? Ethan's heart pounded as he listened, his eyes locked on the screen. Rachel went on, maybe we should go to a motel, but wait, Kate leaves the day after tomorrow. Perfect. I'll come to you then, I'd much rather that than some sketchy motel. Ethan sat back, feeling a chill. The cameras hadn't caught Nick in the house, but now he knew where Rachel would be. His initial plan to catch them in his home had fallen through, but an idea sparked, a plan that involved Kate. He glanced at his watch, calculating the time. Right now, Kate was likely on her own, without Nick around. Without hesitating, he called Kate, keeping his tone calm yet serious as he suggested meeting at a nearby cafe in an hour. She was just getting off work, and while Kate sounded a bit surprised, maybe even a little intrigued by the secrecy, she agreed. An hour later, Ethan arrived at the cafe, finding Kate already seated at a quiet table in the corner. She looked curious, perhaps a little amused. Ethan, Kate began with a slight smile, what's with all the secrecy? And wait, how did you even know I'm leaving the day after tomorrow? He paused briefly, choosing to be straightforward. I know because it's actually part of why I wanted to meet you. I need to talk to you about Rachel and Nick. The curiosity in her eyes quickly shifted to a wary confusion. What's going on with Nick and Rachel? They're seeing each other, Kate. I overheard Rachel on the phone, planning to meet Nick at your house while you're out of town. She stared at him, her expression flickering from shock to anger and then to disbelief. Ethan, that can't be right. Nick and we've had issues, sure, but him having an affair with Rachel? She's my sister. Ethan reached into his pocket, pulling out the shirt button he'd found beneath the bedroom window. He placed it on the table in front of her. I found this under our bedroom window the day Nick and Rachel were together. He must have lost it sneaking out. Kate picked up the button, examining it as if trying to make it fit into her understanding, struggling with the reality before her. Her fingers clenched around it, her jaw tightening. I can't believe this, she whispered, her voice full of hurt and anger. After everything we've been through. Ethan leaned forward, speaking gently but firmly. I know this is overwhelming, but don't make any sudden moves. If we're going to catch them, we need to be smart about it. Her eyes met his, blazing with emotion. And how do you suggest we do that? "We catch them in the act," he replied. "If we get undeniable proof, we'll have what we need to confront them, and what you'll need if this goes to court. Let me set up a few cameras in your house tomorrow while Nick's at work. We'll watch everything together the day after, when you're supposedly out of town." Kate hesitated, her fury battling against the unease of spying in her own home. But at last, she nodded. "Fine. If they're really doing this behind our backs, I want to see every sordid detail." The next morning, Ethan purchased a set of cameras and headed to Kate's house while Nick was at work. He carefully placed them in discreet locations, ensuring they would capture each key area. Once satisfied, he sent Kate a quick text, "All set. They won't see it coming." The following day, Kate left her house as though heading to her charity event, driving a few miles away before meeting Ethan at Sam's place. Sitting together in tense silence, they watched Ethan's laptop as the camera feeds came to life. A heavy tension filled the air as they braced themselves for what might unfold. Hours passed before their patience finally paid off. The front door of Kate's house creaked open, and Nick stepped inside, glancing around cautiously as he moved through each room, double-checking that Kate was gone. Once satisfied, he pulled out his phone and called Rachel. "Kate left for her event," he said with a smug smile. "I'm waiting for you." As dusk settled outside, darkening the sky, Rachel's figure finally appeared on the screen about 40 minutes later, walking up to the door. Nick greeted her eagerly, pulling her into a hug, making a few lewd gestures that made her laugh. The carefree, almost jubilant expression on Rachel's face sent a surge of anger through Ethan. He glanced over at Kate, noting the storm of fury tightening her features as she watched in silence. The couple poured themselves glasses of wine, clinking them together in a mock toast before settling onto the couch, leaning in close as they exchanged whispers and quiet laughter. Ethan and Kate sat side by side, watching in a tense silence, their anger building with each passing moment. Just then, as Rachel took a sip of her wine, a small gray cat wandered over, rubbing affectionately against her leg. Rachel jolted back with a startled yelp. "Oh my God, these damn cats. I can't stand them." Kate was always bringing animals home as a kid. "Nick, get rid of this thing." Nick chuckled, shaking his head. "That's Kate for you, the cat lady." Grinning, he picked up the cat, carried it to the bathroom, and shut the door with a careless laugh. Ethan glanced over and noticed Kate's face hardening, her jaw clenched, her knuckles white as she gripped the edge of the table. Her eyes burned with anger. "Kate," he asked cautiously, "are you okay?" She turned to him, every word seething with rage. "Those bastards," she spat, her voice low and trembling. "They're locking my cat away so they can play lovers in my house. I'll blow their heads off." Before Ethan could react, Kate was on her feet, storming out of the room, leaving him in shock. "Kate, wait," he called after her, but she was already outside, moving fast. By the time he reached the door, she was in her car, tires screeching as she sped away. Ethan stood on the porch, stunned, watching her taillights vanish down the street. This wasn't how he'd planned it. He'd intended to confront Rachel and Nick together, with control on his side. But Kate's fury had ignited too fast, forcing his hand. Swearing under his breath, he scrambled to his car, started the engine, and chased after her. As he sped down the road, a sinking feeling settled in his chest. He cursed himself for involving Kate. Her anger was a force he hadn't fully anticipated. Now everything he'd so carefully planned was on the verge of spiraling out of control. When he arrived at Kate's house, the scene was far more chaotic than he'd feared. Kate had already stormed through the front door, her voice filling the house as she hurled a torrent of furious curses. Ethan quickly jumped out of his car and sprinted toward the house, hearing the sounds of a commotion from upstairs. Looking up, he saw Rachel leaning out of a window, her face pale, wearing only a bra as she fumbled with the strap. Her expression was frozen in horror as her eyes met his. "Ethan," she cried, her voice trembling, panic filling her gaze. "Oh my God, was this a setup?" "Looks that way, Rachel," Ethan replied, a twisted satisfaction creeping into his voice. "You're not getting away with it this time." Rachel's face crumpled as she muttered, "Oh, damn." She ducked out of sight for a moment, then reappeared, shouting desperately. "Ethan, help me. She's going to kill us all." Before she could say another word, a hand reached out and yanked her away from the window. Rachel let out a piercing scream, followed by a cacophony of shouting and scuffling noises. Realizing the situation was unraveling fast, Ethan dashed into the house, bounding up the stairs, and burst into the bedroom. The scene before him was utter chaos. A thick, sour odor hung in the air, stinging his nose. His eyes darted down to the floor, where Nick lay sprawled out, clutching his side, his face flushed and miserable as he mumbled incoherently. Kate and Rachel were tangled in a fierce struggle, rolling across the floor as they grappled with each other. Kate had a tight hold on Rachel's hair, while Rachel screamed, her face contorted in pain as she hurled a stream of curses. Both women clawed and thrashed, locked in a furious battle that seemed to fill every inch of the room. The couple poured themselves glasses of wine, clinking them together in a mock toast before settling onto the couch, leaning in close as they exchanged whispers and quiet laughter. Ethan and Kate sat side by side, watching in a tense silence, their anger building with each passing moment. Just then, as Rachel took a sip of her wine, a small gray cat wandered over, rubbing affectionately against her leg. Rachel jolted back with a startled yelp. "Oh my God, these damn cats. I can't stand them." Kate was always bringing animals home as a kid. "Nick, get rid of this thing." Nick chuckled, shaking his head. "That's Kate for you, the cat lady." Grinning, he picked up the cat, carried it to the bathroom, and shut the door with a careless laugh. Ethan glanced over and noticed Kate's face hardening, her jaw clenched, her knuckles white as she gripped the edge of the table. Her eyes burned with anger. "Kate," he asked cautiously, "are you okay?" She turned to him, every word seething with rage. "Those bastards," she spat, her voice low and trembling. "They're locking my cat away so they can play lovers in my house. I'll blow their heads off." Before Ethan could react, Kate was on her feet, storming out of the room, leaving him in shock. "Kate, wait," he called after her, but she was already outside, moving fast. By the time he reached the door, she was in her car, tires screeching as she sped away. Ethan stood on the porch, stunned, watching her taillights vanish down the street. This wasn't how he'd planned it. He'd intended to confront Rachel and Nick together, with control on his side. But Kate's fury had ignited too fast, forcing his hand. Swearing under his breath, he scrambled to his car, started the engine, and chased after her. As he sped down the road, a sinking feeling settled in his chest. He cursed himself for involving Kate. Her anger was a force he hadn't fully anticipated. Now everything he'd so carefully planned was on the verge of spiraling out of control. When he arrived at Kate's house, the scene was far more chaotic than he'd feared. Kate had already stormed through the front door, her voice filling the house as she hurled a torrent of furious curses. Ethan quickly jumped out of his car and sprinted toward the house, hearing the sounds of a commotion from upstairs. Looking up, he saw Rachel leaning out of a window, her face pale, wearing only a bra as she fumbled with the strap. Her expression was frozen in horror as her eyes met his. "Ethan," she cried, her voice trembling, panic filling her gaze. "Oh my God, was this a setup?" "Looks that way, Rachel," Ethan replied, a twisted satisfaction creeping into his voice. "You're not getting away with it this time." Rachel's face crumpled as she muttered, "Oh, damn." She ducked out of sight for a moment, then reappeared, shouting desperately. "Ethan, help me. She's going to kill us all." Before she could say another word, a hand reached out and yanked her away from the window. Rachel let out a piercing scream, followed by a cacophony of shouting and scuffling noises. Realizing the situation was unraveling fast, Ethan dashed into the house, bounding up the stairs, and burst into the bedroom. The scene before him was utter chaos. A thick, sour odor hung in the air, stinging his nose. His eyes darted down to the floor, where Nick lay sprawled out, clutching his side, his face flushed and miserable as he mumbled incoherently. Kate and Rachel were tangled in a fierce struggle, rolling across the floor as they grappled with each other. Kate had a tight hold on Rachel's hair, while Rachel screamed, her face contorted in pain as she hurled a stream of curses. Both women clawed and thrashed, locked in a furious battle that seemed to fill every inch of the room. Ethan stood frozen in the doorway, his hand instinctively going to his head as he tried to make sense of the chaos before him. For a moment, he just stared, utterly dumbfounded, unsure whether to dive in and pull them apart or let the madness run its course. Then, his gaze caught something lying on the floor near Nick, a small canister, its label barely visible. Ethan crouched, picked it up, and squinted at the writing. "Pepper spray," he muttered, piecing together where the stinging smell was coming from. Curious to see if anything was left in the canister, Ethan gave it a quick press, sending a mist straight at Nick's face. "Enough already!" Nick yelled, shielding his burning eyes. "God, what did I do to deserve this?" He writhed on the floor, groaning miserably, while Ethan tossed the canister aside. Meanwhile, Kate and Rachel continued their tussle, rolling across the floor, each clutching handfuls of the other's hair, shrieking and hurling insults with abandon. It was as if years of unresolved resentment had erupted all at once, each word dripping with anger. "I've always known you were jealous of me." Kate spat, giving Rachel's hair a vicious tug. "Oh, please." Rachel snapped back. "You've been a smug, self-righteous brat since we were kids." Ethan shook his head. Enough was enough. He dashed to the bathroom, filled a plastic bucket with cold water, and returned to the bedroom. He took a second to open the bathroom door, letting Fluffy, Kate's cat, escape from her makeshift prison. Then, with a single swift motion, he dumped the icy water over the two women. They gasped, releasing each other instantly, and scrambled to opposite corners of the room, dripping and shivering as they tried to catch their breath. Both sisters sat there, drenched, their makeup smeared, hair tangled, and scratches marking their arms. Nick, still on the floor, tried unsuccessfully to wipe his face with the water now pooling on the hardwood. Taking a deep breath, Ethan felt his patience snap, his voice cutting through the silence. "You're all completely out of your minds. Just look at yourselves, what on earth have you done?" Silence blanketed the room as they looked at him, wide-eyed, absorbing his words. Ethan turned to Rachel first, his tone sharp. "Rachel, I thought I knew the person I married, but you've shown me otherwise. Sneaking around, lying, humiliating me with Nick of all people, your sister's husband, you've made it clear who you are. And I don't want any part of it." Rachel's mouth opened, but he held up a hand, stopping her. "You think this is just a game, don't you? Toying with people's lives, laughing it off while you hurt everyone who cared about you." Next, he turned to Nick, who had managed to sit up, still rubbing his swollen eyes. "And you're a coward, sneaking around with your wife's sister, lying to her, making a complete mockery of marriage and family. You want to act innocent, but you're right here at the center of this mess." Nick looked down, his face red with shame, unable to meet Ethan's gaze. Finally, Ethan turned to Kate, who was still seething, though her expression softened slightly as he addressed her. "Kate, I thought maybe bringing you into this would help reveal the truth, but charging in here, getting physical, it isn't going to change anything. If you want to expose them, do it with some dignity. Don't stoop to their level." Kate blinked, her anger easing as she took in his words. Ethan took a step back, looking at each of them in turn. "I don't know what I ever saw in any of you. Right now, this whole mess is beyond me." For a moment, no one moved. The silence hung heavily, each of them processing their own shame, anger, or guilt. Just then, Fluffy the gray cat trotted back into the room, her tail high, eyes bright, and a soft meow breaking the silence as she weaved around Ethan's legs, as if she alone held the answers. Ethan looked down at Fluffy, his expression softening as he bent to scoop her up, cradling the small, purring bundle with a sad smile. "Seems like you're the only one with any sense here, Fluffy," he murmured. His gaze swept over the room one last time, taking in Rachel, Kate, and Nick's damp, shell-shocked faces. With a sigh, he added, "We've done enough damage for one day. I'll take Fluffy with me for now, he deserves a break from all this chaos. Don't worry, Kate, I'll keep him safe and bring him back soon. But as for the rest of you, I think it's time you all sorted this mess out yourselves." Without waiting for a reply, Ethan turned and strode out, Fluffy purring softly in his arms. Heading down the stairs and out the front door, he felt a strange sense of relief settling over him. The decision was clear, divorce was the only way forward. And the footage from tonight would be more than enough to support his case in court. Once outside, he placed Fluffy gently on the passenger seat, started the engine, and drove off into the quiet night, leaving behind the fractured remnants of trust and betrayal. And now, dear viewers, the story turns to you. How do you think the divorce will unfold? Will Rachel put up a fight? Will Kate pursue her own justice? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and if you enjoyed the story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Wishing everyone a brighter tomorrow. Take care, and best of luck.